guys, it's Kate. This is my little tour of a multimedia piece, Tier 3 Multimedia, and I'm going to give you guys a tour of the BBC News's piece that they did for the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, a piece called The Hurricane Station. So, basically this was a 6-part piece that followed a radio station in New Orleans that stayed on the air throughout the hurricane and then post the hurricane once the levees broke. And the BBC found this station and told their story of how they managed to stay on the air. And it's a pretty remarkable story. But first I'm going to take you through some of the multimedia elements, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I thought about the piece. We'll kind of grade it, and we'll see maybe what they could have done better and what they did well. So this is the Hurricane Station. So obviously this is predominantly a text piece. So there's text over here on this left side, and then as you see, an image here. But one of the interesting things that I found is that as you keep scrolling through the text, the image here will change, and that change corresponds with where you're scrolling in the text. So the idea is once you get to a certain point in the story, the image that you see to your right will then correspond with the part that you're reading in the story. So in other words, when they're talking about where the hurricane was and the route of the hurricane, you'll see the image here on your right that follows the route of the hurricane, as opposed to the first image, which is this gentleman named Dave, who is the lead for the story. He sort of provides the micro lead. And as you continue to scroll through the elements of the story, you'll see they have pictures that take up the majority of your screen. And this is really starting to talk about when things got bad and got scary during the hurricane. So they also have some video elements here integrated right into it. So I'm going to play it for a second. Hopefully it'll work. And
it's flooded. It's about 6 feet. My house is underwater. I have me, my husband, the 3-year-old, and a newborn. So we're stuck with no water, and one of the babies is running a high fever.
Give me line 5. Freddie in Lakefront. Freddie, you're on WWL.
So you'll see with this, the interesting thing they did is obviously they had images that photographers and people had taken during the day and throughout the weekend of the hurricane and the hurricane destruction. And because this piece is about a radio station, they obviously have a lot of audio from the radio station pretty readily available. So they were able to integrate it and create their own piece of video using images and video that were filmed that day and audio provided by the radio station. And then as we continue to scroll, again, with the text and changing pictures. And then you get to another cool element of this, which I thought, and again, we're still in section 1, this is section 1 of 6, but they have what's basically the equivalent of a timeline, but it's not your typical sort of timeline JS type timeline, because it's integrated into the story and it's integrated into the pictures. So here you'll see is the first sort of image they have where they're talking about what the hurricane looked like on maps, and so you can see this was on Friday the 26th of August 2005, and so this is when it hadn't yet hit New Orleans. And so then you keep scrolling through the story, and then sort of timeline part 2 is where things stand as of Saturday. And then again, timeline part 3 is Monday. And so this is sort of the map of the hurricane and the changes in the hurricane. And then you get to section 2 of the piece, which is talking about the evacuation of New Orleans. And so you see here it says Monday the 29th of August 2005 is when the hurricane hits New Orleans, and that corresponds with the change in section, which is this evacuation. So Here, then it's talking about people who are sort of starting to obviously board up their houses, and you get pictures of that here. So here, this is another map, again pretty simple, but really important to the story, where you're starting to talk about where things were in terms of where the radio station was, where the people were, and where things were really starting to flood. So, basically, the story, if you were to read through it, talks about how there was this main radio station and then this bunker that a couple of the people who worked for the station went to during the hurricane, and they actually had to stay there. They couldn't get out. But because they were in that bunker, they were able to broadcast, and they were able to sort of bounce the signals back and forth for a time while the main building was still sort of up and running. And because they were so close to the transmitters, you see here's the transmitter, here's the bunker, and here's the station, they were able to get, decent signals when a lot of other radio stations and a lot of their places were not. And then also here's the Superdome, which any of you who followed Hurricane Katrina while it was going on, or the aftermath, or even some of the 10-year anniversary coverage, you've definitely heard about the Superdome, or if you ever follow football, I guess you've probably heard about it too. But the Superdome served as sort of the emergency supplies and shelter station for people. In theory, it was supposed to be people that couldn't evacuate, but the problem was it got overcrowded, and you had people jumping to their deaths, committing suicide. You had a lot of looting and things like that. But obviously this radio station, they could see all of that, out their windows from the start, and they were right there next to it. So in terms of talking to people and really witnessing things, not only firsthand stories, but, as reporters, they were in a really unique position. And this map sort of helps emphasize that. And then again, we get to some of the textual elements, and then some of the larger pictures, again, of people boarding up their houses. This is talking about one of the reporters at the radio station. And then you get to another piece of video. The cool thing about this piece of video is it really sort of takes you through the journey of the Superdome. So I'll play a little bit of this.
Already hundreds of people have made their way to the Superdome, waiting for it to be open. Hundreds of people showing up, some with suitcases, bottled water and food in hand, others with nothing but the clothes on their back.
I remember very well when I first got here and going to the doors where they were unloading the buses of the people who had nowhere else to go, had, it seemed, planned to just ride out the storm in their homes. But authorities went door to door, house to house, and told people, you will die if you stay in your house. You must come with us. We're going to take you to the Superdome. And I remember talking to those people as they walked in, and most of them initially felt secure.
One of the shelters of last resort designated by the city is the Superdome, where we find WWL's Dave Cohen.
They were camping out. They had brought ice chests, pillows, blankets, whatever they could grab on their way out. And they were just trying to find any little place, whether they were laying down on the field or sitting in the seats or hiding away in a little nook or cranny around the periphery. They were just looking for anywhere they could find any kind of comfort. As the storm blew in and the roof blew off and the rain came in and it got hot and sticky, it really became a sense of disparity in here. One man who couldn't handle it jumped off of one of the upper level balconies to his death on the floor here in the Superdome. We know that some people who were here who had medical difficulties did not survive. And it really became a place of mass suffering where people didn't have any sense of hope and didn't know if they would ever have happiness in this city again. I was standing in one of the upper decks with my wife and some co-workers. Everyone rose to their feet and were clapping and cheering along, and we felt special, and we felt like survivors, and I think you could feel in this building that it also meant people felt a sense of hope that they hadn't felt in many months. After 80% of their city was flooded, some 1,800 people died, and there were predictions that New Orleans would never be inhabitable again. That was kind of the exclamation point on the statement that we will be okay, we will come back, and we will thrive again.
So I played that whole video for a couple reasons. One is I think it integrates a lot of things really nicely. Number one is music. I don't know how many of you guys picked up on the music there, but the song is Wake Me Up When September Ends, which is a song by Green Day. Yes, I think yeah, it's Green Day. I'm not that stupid. And I believe that song was actually written in the wake of 9/11, but it kind of fits here, and the spirit of the music really fits. And the sort of undertones that they used to underscore the video, I think the music there worked really well. It's possible the song was actually written in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, but I'm pretty sure it was 9/11. Because Hurricane Katrina was in August. So, but also one of the things I think this video does really well is they integrate those images of what the Superdome was like during Hurricane Katrina when those levees broke, and they brought the reporter, this guy Dave Cohen, back there to sort of stand in those seats like those people. You know, when they talk about people dying and they show you the empty seats, that's sort of a haunting image, and you get the best sense I think you can, having not been there, of sort of what that was like, but also the sort of road to recovery. So they show you, you know, this is what the Superdome was like on its very, very worst day. And then a year later, when the Superdome reopened to a packed crowd, this is what the Superdome was like on its very, very best day. And they used this reporter, Dave Cohen, in this location as sort of a central element to it all. So even though it's just sort of, you could say it's just a video, they really do integrate a lot of elements really well into this video. There's also sort of the textual element that tells the reporting, the narrative of it. Because you'll see, or you saw, there's not a reporter that actually speaks on this video. And that, to me, I think had a reporter spoken on this video, it definitely would have ruined it. Had we seen a reporter or heard a reporter, it would have ruined sort of the spirit and the impact. So continuing here to scroll, again, you got some of the large pictures and text. And here you'll see, if you scroll here, this picture, it completely changes the orientation. So it shows that there's a lot of flexibility within that simple little picture changing multimedia element. Obviously, pull quote over here, which isn't anything hugely special, but it is nice visually to occasionally have some pull quotes like that. And it's important. It makes the story easier to read. And then we get to section 3, which is the arrival of the actual hurricane. So everything in the story up to this point, with the exception of the video that we played, is really just talking about the sort of prior to. So you get Hurricane Katrina, you get, again, more images. Here's a little bit of video. I'm not going to play this whole video, but
we here on the 5th floor of the Dominion Tower were hearing windows breaking left and right. We had the studios boarded up. We had to, at one point, vacate the studios.
So this is, again, the audio from the radio station and pictures and video from the BBC sort of integrated together. But it also, it explains, you know, why the journalists at the radio station were doing what they were doing as the hurricane got worse. And again, with the picture change, this is a clump of fire ants, which is disgusting, but it's something that they had to deal with. There were a lot of fire ants and a lot of, you know, things like that. And an image like this, to me, the first thing I thought was like, ooh, that's gross, but also, wow, the fact that these journalists traipsed through that, it looks extremely painful and gigantic. So, and then here again is another sort of picture of the hurricane, again to reiterate that timeline element I was talking about earlier. And here you get into more text. And here you'll see, for this section, you've noticed I've scrolled through pretty quickly, it's a little more texty, but this is where sort of the text in particular is really powerful. And I think while as multimedia journalists we could say, oh, sure, it's just text, but this is a really powerful story that they're telling, and they do a really good job. So it's important that these multimedia elements complement the text rather than overtake it, and that sort of everything complements each other, which is something that I think this particular piece does really well. While all the video elements are great and the picture elements are great and the text is great, they all really are working together to form what I thought was a really great story. They told a really great story and in a really interesting way. So again, you start to see the Superdome as it fills with people, and then you get to section 4, which is the levees. And if you guys know anything about Hurricane Katrina or what happened, you know that a lot of the damage was actually caused post-hurricane. So the hurricane rains had stopped, but then the levees broke. And the levees were what was keeping all the water from the hurricane basically from rushing the city and drowning people and drowning things and injuring people. And when those levees broke, then all hell broke loose. So here, Jurgen, it's another video, you're hearing the voices of some of the people in Mid-City and in the 9th Ward, which were some of the areas heavily destroyed.
Earlene in Mid-City, you're on WWL.
Yes, my name is Earlene Singers. I'm calling. This whole area is flooded back here, and it happened after the storm. We sitting on the porch looking at the water rising up.
I was calling for help because the helicopters were passing all over, and we was trying to give stress signals and all that, and they wasn't stopping at all. Wasn't nobody coming to help us. My feet was in water when I was talking. And then after that, the water came up to that stop sign is out there.
We don't have no way to get out or nothing. It's just coming up.
Where are you again? Give me a corner. Give me a street corner.
Piers and DeHamico. I mean, it's coming up on the porch. We never had no flood back. The cars is on the water completely.
I was feeling that this was my last resort, that this was it. If we didn't get no help, we were going to drown.
Is it still rising right now?
It's still rising.
Make sure that you keep a really close eye on that. If worse comes to worse, find a way to get yourself, on your roof.
Don't go into your attic unless there is a window in there that you can
unless
open.
you know you can get to the roof from the attic, don't go in it.
So, obviously one of the things the BBC did here for this video, and for a couple other videos scattered throughout, is they followed up with the people that the radio station spoke with, which journalistically, when you're telling a story like this, is really an incredible thing to do, and it adds a really sort of powerful element to the story, and I think that was really important. And you'll see there, one of the things that really accentuates sort of the dire situation of this is the concern not only in the woman's voice you can hear from 10 years ago, but also in the voice of the journalists, and that, raises some interesting questions. These journalists were really functioning for these people as their sort of their last hope, their last resort, and this radio station was a way for people to hopefully get their name out there, and so that they could get emergency assistance and things like that, so that they wouldn't die, and a lot of people did die that day. And so again, they did the same thing here, and you'll see again the picture here. People were drawing on their roofs in the hopes that helicopters and rescue personnel would see it. And then we get to section 5, which is the escape. So this is talking about how the people in the radio station had to make decisions about, what they wanted to do, and how people in the city really had to try and escape this horrible, horrible situation once the levees broke. And again here with the text and pull quote and images and, people you see trying to escape in any way they can. And you'll see that you can see the houses underwater and the rescue helicopter here. And for this part, I think again it's one of those really sort of powerful elements of the story, and so you probably don't want too many multimedia elements here. That's why they have predominantly text and picture. So that whole section was predominantly text and picture. This section is the last section, which is Katrina's Wake, talking about sort of when people started to come back in, and what listening to the coverage of the hurricane meant, not only to the journalists that covered it, but to the people that listened. And then here you have the statement by the mayor, which I'll just play a little bit of.
What can we do here?
Keep talking about it.
We'll do that. What else can we do?
Organize people to write letters, make calls to their congressmen, to the president, to the governor. Flood their doggone offices with requests to do something. This is ridiculous. I don't want to see anybody do any more goddamn press conferences. Put a moratorium on press conferences. Don't do another press conference until the resource.
So you see with that, that again was just a little bit of audio and video there, but you can see just how angry that public officials in New Orleans were getting with the lack of assistance, and that became a sticking point for politics in this country. And so again, you go sort of back to the picture and scroll, and then here are your end credits. So while we sit on the end credits, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I liked about this, what I didn't. I'm going to double check that we're recording still. Yes, we are. Hopefully, everything worked okay. But I think I've mentioned a lot of the things this piece did well. I'm going to talk about a couple of the things I think it could have done better, which is, I'm calling this a Tier 3 multimedia piece. I think someone could easily make the argument for Tier 2 because it's pictures, video, audio. These are all, things we know how to do, and text and maps. These are all things that we know how to do. But one of the reasons I'm calling it Tier 3 is because of the amount of work, the time that I think went into this. They talked to the people at the radio station. They took the effort to follow up with the people that the radio station had spoken with, and a lot of people were displaced post-Hurricane Katrina. So I don't know how difficult that was for the BBC to do, but I would surmise that it was a fairly time-consuming process. So I think that it's really, really great journalism for them to do that. And as I mentioned up top, I think one of the things that makes, that distinguishes sort of a Tier 2 and a Tier 3 multimedia journalism piece is the integration between elements, but also the ultimate impact of the story. And this was obviously, Hurricane Katrina was something that it was a momentous event in our nation's history. It was a natural disaster that was unlike a lot of things our country had seen. It became, a political point, as a lot of things do. It became a time for a city to sort of come together, and the city of New Orleans has recovered and is still recovering, and that's one of the things this piece talks about. But I think because of those sort of important story and journalistic elements, that's part of what made this story really powerful, and at least to me, pretty Tier 3. And also the way that those videos were put together, they weren't just videos. They had, text overlays and pictures and video and music, so they weren't just sort of some cell phone video thrown together on Final Cut or Premiere. They were really cleanly edited. And as you can see from the credits, this project had a pretty big team behind it that I can surmise was working for a decent amount of time on a project like this. And usually, you know, when you have big anniversaries, reputable news organizations do tend to put out big anniversary projects. But the thing also that made this one different, and I think that's another thing that distinguishes Tier 3 journalism, multimedia journalism pieces, is that they're different from, you know, other journalism pieces, different in the multimedia they use and in the stories they tell. So this particular story was different in the sense that it told the stories not only of, you know, survivors of Hurricane Katrina, and people that had experienced it that day, but it told the story of journalists, and it really took you to the scene with a group of journalists that were there and covering it that day. And so you got to see the disaster through the eyes of a lot of different people. So I found this a really interesting piece. I think that it's definitely Tier 3. It could, you know, have had some improvements, a little bit more interesting maps, or, you know, you could have done like SoundSite with some of the things integrating sound into the text. So absolutely they could have done more. I don't think that their decision not to do more with it was motivated by a lack of time or resources. I think when you're talking about the BBC, they probably have a lot of resources at their disposal. I think it was more motivated by a desire to sort of not detract attention from the heart of the story they were trying to tell. And I think every multimedia element that they included in here really does contribute to the power of the story. And that's what makes it interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in class.